Hello and welcome to another Insider English video. And if you've been watching my other videos, you'll see that we've dealt with aspects of English that are not generally discussed more in detail. And I delved into more subtle distinctions between some and any. We touched on factors that deal with modality and backshifting, and we'll be looking more into that and also into simplification, which I talk about more in detail. And we saw that any and some are often simply rhythmic fillers that serve to make a sentence or question sound more complete and are not always actually necessary, but their lexical function is there. So any has a function, some has a function. And so the main factors, four main factors for most explanations for verbal communication and language learning is context, contextual, intentional, emotional, and opinionated. In questions, for example, any tends to be used to mean I believe there isn't any, or there aren't any remaining, whatever. Whereas when we ask about some, it's because we believe that there are some remaining. If we compare, for example, are there some buses running tonight? I imagine there might be some, or there should be some, where some is optional. So I might say, are the buses running tonight? Are there any night buses? Anywhere, any might mean I can't imagine there are, but I may hope that there are. And are there some train delays? Is when I expect that there might be some. Maybe I witnessed roadworks, or I read it in the paper, or I heard from another source that there are some. So again, any, some, these are lexical items for which there's a function. So some can function as an offer or a request. You might say, would you like some more? Rather than, would you like any more? Although it's possible to say, would you like any more, meaning I don't expect you will want some more, or in actual fact, you may not have any, and you need to cook some more. So, but then mostly you'll use these requests and offers with some. So could I have some more, or could I have, yeah, could I have some more, please? You can take any bus from the main station, means all buses go to the desired destination. If I say you can take some buses to the station, it means there's a limited amount. Same way we can look at the lexical items like much and many having a function, where much is one syllable, single syllable, and it then represents the uncountable. It's also often used with negation, much. We don't have much time. And we won't generally say I have much time. So much is not so much used in the positive. Many is with countable objects and count nouns, and many just happens to have two syllables as well, many. So we can use that as a kind of reminder. Many is countable, much is uncountable. Yet the opposite is true when we use little. Little is for generally for non-countable, and few, which is one syllable, is used for countable. In any case, how many steaks are there? We're talking about a unit, a number of units. Whereas if I say how much beef is there, we're talking about quantity and amount. So uncountable nouns are for categories, abstract nouns, meanings, sense, information. Concepts, also groups of things, um, liquids and dairy products, etc. Uncountable nouns can don't generally have a plural s. You don't, when you don't particularly want to be bothered to count. So we talk about hair, rice, pasta, all things we don't really want to count. It's not that they're not countable, and so countable items that have no s, like people, men, women, children. We're talking about things in general, people, fruit. Again, these are things we don't generally want to count, though it's not impossible to have peoples and things like fruits and cheeses, wines, with an S in some cases. So in other cases, you find the plural noun with objects you probably don't want to count. So for some reason, we talk about bees and beans and peas and nuts and vegetables um, in the plural, even though actually we don't count these generally. So if you're going to memorize all this as rules, and this is what we're saying, and talk about, oh, some of them being exceptions, guaranteed you'll go bananas. And so really, it's more about understanding the concepts. And another thing we talked about was continuous aspect, the so-called progressive continuous, or the phenomenon of the ing, where ing basically is an affix that serves to draw attention, thereby focusing on a particular temporal action or activity or characteristic. By inserting the auxiliary be to form either a past or non-present, non-past tense, we are preparing the receiver for the so-called continuous aspect, where the auxiliary basically acts much like an indefinite article for a noun, which is to say a preparatory syllable to indicate either a countable object or an action that is temporal and the focus, and often the reme of a sentence. So we therefore could also consider it a kind of determiner in the true sense of the word, be. The ing affix, in other words, merely indicates a focus on a particular action to highlight one or two possible factors. That is, one temporal, and thereby also temporary, and action itself, though really that comes from the fact that we have the verb be, but also then a hint at a partial witnessing of an event. That means, if I illustrate, I watched the parade. That means I watched and observed and witnessed the whole event. The preterite is indicated by the affix ed, watched, the ed on the verb. The alternative is a sound change on the verb we call so-called irregular, like, for example, see becoming saw. So I saw a crowd of spectators at the parade. And then we would have this maybe in the past. I was watching the parade. I observed a crowd in motion at a given time, but not necessarily the full event. So one would not normally say, I was seeing the parade, because seeing need not be the focus or reme. However, it isn't so much a grammatical mistake as much as it is a semantic alteration. Again, we're not memorizing tenses and forms. We're looking more at the semantics and lexical aspects of things. So I was seeing things is possible, right? I had the wrong impression of something. I was seeing things. I had been looking at something for a moment, looking at I was seeing things as well. So the so-called present form does not relate to temporality, but rather it serves to communicate that which is factual, intemporal, routine, set, or predetermined, unchanging, or beyond one's power to change as an individual. Right? Now, so these aspects, I think, I address really more in detail for teachers mainly, that we can become aware of what we're teaching and how we're teaching to learners, not filling learners with rules and so on. So the content of my ebook called Insider English is a unique compendium of 24 years of experience of teaching English and mainly to adults, but also 12 years of gathering data from my research, which began around 2011 on the Evernote platform or cloud, where I started to compile and expand and improve the content on a daily basis. My ebook is what I believe to be an essential addition to the syllabus for teaching of English, as well as for more autonomous learners of English who are tired of traditional and flawed contemporary methods sold as um, as a commodity in the ESL business, as opposed to it being educational. The English has become, no thanks to the major publishers of English course books, whose traditional approach to teaching grammar has stunted the growth of English, um, limiting instead its potential as the flexible language English really is. My ebook, which uses a more lexical approach, bridges the gaps, providing the missing links to how English is currently taught, that which brings so many more questions up and which distracts learners generally from actually getting to know how English actually works. In contrast to hard copy books, where content and topics become so rapidly unappealing and outdated and inaccurate, um, in my ebook, by contrast, has the advantage of being more readily editable, updatable, improvable, and expandable. And it's an educational product. It's unquestionable that the virtual world is vital for education, especially in these times, though it is questionable that they are more eco-friendly. And with every purchase of my ebook, 1% of the proceeds go to plantatreefoundation.org. So my novel idea has been to publish Insider English as an ebook in the cloud, currently on Buy Me a Coffee and Teachers Pay Teachers, but also now on Podia. So I'm building a website there, and you can also access the one-time fee of 80 euros or 90 US dollars, and thereby members get continual weekly, sometimes updates, and in the cloud, sometimes daily updates. So I also offer live courses on Zoom and my rates are moderate. I I hope you'll be joining me for upcoming videos, and also encourage you to have a look at the websites where you can take a look at free content from my book, and then hopefully also make a purchase to help me continue my prospects of improving English to the masses. Thank you for watching.